never smoke the dizzy, but we can always share some disease. It's just a cup in time. This song doesn't have to rhyme. Life's all of us, not every moment we can be feeling fine. I wanna share a moment, just a second if you will, maybe even a cup of thrill. We could share this performance. It's tea time, come sit with me.
Well, welcome guys. Miss Liz in the house. That's right. And I have a returning guest, and you know how I love those returning guests because the ice is already broken. Tonight I have Joel McKay in the house, and we're going to be talking about his new book. But before we get all that started, we're going to get you guys over to Miss Liz's YouTube, Spotify, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, all of those good platforms. You guys know where they are. Just give those a like, follow, subscribe, and let's get these tea times out because they all make a difference for my guests and for myself and for the listening audience as well. And that's what we do, is we connect tea. And tonight's tea is funny, magic, father and son. We're going to get into that because that is Joel's tea. So we're going to serve that tea to you guys all tonight. But before all that good stuff, we're going to get disclaimer in and then a little intro, and then we're going to get Joel in here and we're going to spill some tea together. Disclaimer for Miss Liz's Tea Time live show. Miss Liz's Tea Time is a global platform dedicated to sharing real life stories, diverse perspectives, and meaningful conversations that inspire awareness, healing, and connection. I, Miss Liz, is going live using StreamYard. Before leaving a comment during the live broadcast, please grant StreamYard permission to display your name at StreamYard.com. Please be advised that all the content brought forward during any Tea Time show is presented in good faith. However, discussions may include opinions, beliefs, and perspectives that do not necessarily represent the views of Miss Liz or the Tea Time platform. Information shared by guests is based on their own experiences and is perceived to be accurate at the given time of airing. All guests, viewers, and participations are responsible for using their own good judgment when considering any action or decision that may relate to these discussions. Some episodes may include and cover sensitive topics, including but not limited to trauma, abuse, grief, mental health, and other emotionally triggering subjects. Listeners' and viewers' discretion is strongly advised. Tea Time with Miss Liz is an open discussion forum designed to offer insight, inspire awareness, and create connection. It is not a substitute for professional, medical, legal, or therapeutical advice. If you require professional support, please seek assistance from qualified professionals or trusted resources in your area. If you have any questions regarding this disclaimer or the content of the discussion, you are welcome to contact me, aka Miss Liz, directly at my email at bookingmissliz@gmail.com or visit my link tree at Miss Liz's Tea Time. By choosing to participate in, comment on, or view these live shows, you acknowledge and accept this disclaimer. Your participation is entirely voluntary. I, Miss Liz, welcomes you to join the conversation with an open heart, and if at any time you feel this platform is not right for you, I respect your decision and welcome you back whenever you are ready. Tea with Miss Liz. Tea Time with Miss Liz is serving truth and awareness one cup at a time. Well, tonight with Tea Time with Miss Liz, where storytelling meets soul and imagination meets meaning. Today, I'm excited to share this Tea Time with Joel McKay, award-winning author, journalist, and creative voice behind Wolf at the Door and the Dungeoneer and the Treasure of Rome. Joel's stories blend humor, heart, and raw humanity, shining a light on the monsters we meet both within ourselves and in the world around us. His words invite us to laugh, reflect, and rediscover the beauty of being human through the magic of storytelling. So settle in with your favorite cup and join me with this creative and heartfelt conversation with Joel McKay. And let me get him in here and let's spill some tea together. Welcome, Joel.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you again.
It is nice to see you again. I always love having return guests because then I know I'm doing something right.
Well, you kind of get to just dive into, I would think, a little bit differently than, sort of starting from scratch.
Absolutely. Well, for the first-time listeners, Joel, we're going to jump back into the old rabbit hole. Who was Joel as a little guy and who's Joel now?
Joel's the little guy's the same as Joel now. It's just that Joel now has to pay taxes and go to a job. But people who know me well would say I actually probably haven't changed at all. I would say as a child, I was full of mischief and loved to run around. And I was never a team sports guy, but I loved playing outdoors. I grew up in a neighborhood wasn't always the safest neighborhood, but it was kind of a classic 1980s suburbia where there was kids in every house and everybody met up in the alleyway and then, you know, invented games and ways to play together. And I was big on fantasy then as I am now, and scary stories and toys and all kinds of stuff. And you can see some of that surrounding me now, even in my what I call is my nerd den, which is my home office. And then Joel now is the person who is appreciates the child, but is the adult that is, you know, carrying out some of those hopes and dreams in the way only an adult can. And I think that is where my fiction comes from. There's no question, but also my day-to-day career, my life, my relationship with my children, all those things. So not a lot different, but an evolution, I think, would probably be an accurate way to describe it.
Well, I love it. And it's a different answer than the last time. So anybody that wants to check out Joel's first tea time, you'll see he gave me a completely different answer this time. We're in the nerd den. The last time I think I was in another office, or were you just?
Yeah, you were probably in an office. Yeah, last time we did this. But yeah, no, this is a nerd den. So I get to work from here 1 day a week, which is lovely. Sometimes two. And so I'm surrounded by all my books and video games, and as you can see, comic books and scary masks and that kind of thing. And believe it or not, the day job is being a city manager, so that it is not nerdy in any way. So there is definitely a little bit of reprieve, emotional reprieve I get working from this room sometimes from the heavy issues of running a municipality that sort of hit you over the head on a day-to-day basis.
Well, I think, Joel, that just goes to show you, right? During the day, city guy, during the night, nerd guy.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And those that work with me and know me know that actually there's not a lot of separation between the two. Joel is Joel, and he brings his nerd sentiments to the running of a city, and I bring my running the city sentiments to writing books too. So yeah, you can't kind of separate the two really.
And the last time you were on Tea Time, you were here for the book. It came from the trees. Tonight
Yeah.
How have you changed since that time?
You know, I think this latest book is really sort of and I think it's probably why the answer to the first question is different. So it came from the trees and other violent aberrations, as well as Wolf at the Door or horror. And for the last half a decade, that's what I've been moonlighting and selling professionally as horror, which I love. Don't get me wrong. This isn't a qualifier or anything. But it sets the context. So, you know, and those are often monster stories, and they're one-off stories. They're not often serialized or at all. This novel, The Dungeoneers and the Treasure of Roan, is an action adventure fantasy. It's a young adult, and it is the book I would have wanted to read as a kid. So I think coming at you to answer that question and to answer the question again, or help maybe understand why the answer is different to that first question, is that I finally delivered on what I wanted to do as a kid, which was write a sword and sorcery fantasy novel that I would have wanted to read. And so I see that sort of, you know, coming together with my child self in this latest book. But don't get me wrong, there's still monsters in there. There's still the typical dose of Joel humor that is in there. But it is a very different beast, if you will, than some of my previous work.
So, Joel, I'm going to slap the book up so you can describe the cover of it and all of that, because I think it's pretty fun. But then you say there's horror in there. So, I mean, let's kind of talk about the cover and how you got the cover and all that good stuff.
Yeah, so the cover artist who worked on this, I mean, she did. She's from the U.S., so I was able to bridge and work with somebody in the U.S., which is always lovely. But she did the design, and it was interesting because she asked me, she said, well, what do you think the design for the cover should be? And I said, well, you know, like kind of, you know, I want it to be whimsical and fun. And it's about this father and son thieves and that type of thing and sort of an abandoned city. And she said, oh, okay. And I figured she'd come back with a few options and, you know, we'd eventually find our way there. It takes a bit of time with cover, but this was option one. This is what she came up with. She did the entire design for the inside of the book as well. So it's laid out to mirror the same sort of feeling that you find with this book, which is that fun. It is supposed to broadcast to the reader that this is fun, it's whimsical, it's young adult. And when I say horror, I mean there's monsters in it. As any good dungeon-based tale will have, there will be monsters that crawl and creepy crawly things that come out of the dark places of the world. And so that hunt for the treasure in the abandoned city of Rome is sort of where some of that pops up. But yeah, I mean, I'm just in love with the design that she did and sort of where that has ultimately helped sort of explain the book to people who would potentially read it. It is exactly as it looks, I suppose, is probably the best way to put it. There's you can, in this case, judge a book by its cover.
Well, and that's where the father and son comes in, because you mentioned father and son, and I'm like, you gave me father and son for his tea. So that's where the father and son comes in?
Yeah. So the story is about a washed-up thief named Wincott who stumbles into the ancient city of Rome, and as he stumbles into it, he stumbles across his estranged son, Sish. And Sish is also a thief. I never really say how old he is, but he could probably be late teens, early 20s at oldest. But definitely at that stage of life where he's, starting to reflect on and coming to grips with his relationship with his parents as he enters adulthood. And that's sort of the young adult theme that we are working through in this novel is how do you interpret your relationship with your parents and the things that went on with your childhood? How do you make peace with it? Can you make peace with who they are instead of who you wanted them to be or who you thought they were? So you've got these two thieves who don't like each other in the beginning. One likes each other less than the other, and they get kind of forced to work together and then put on the path of hunting for this treasure, which is why Sish is in the dungeon, and reconciling their relationship along the way. And then there's a wide array of a supporting cast of characters, which are the Dungeoneers, which I'm poking a bit of fun there at dungeon stories in that they're do-gooders. They search dungeons just to get rid of evil monsters and find treasure and then protect them and that type of thing. So slightly different than your typical dungeon crawling crew. But definitely poking fun at that and based on, a lot of what you would find in dungeon crawling adventures, be they novels or tabletop games or video games, that type of thing. But it all centers around those two. And their story is told not only as they make their way through the dungeon, but with a series of flashbacks from each of their point of view on basically how they grew up together as father and son and what that looked like and the good and the bad, the funny, the weird, that kind of thing.
So, Joel, did you get the dungeons from Dungeons and Dragons?
Yeah. I mean, it is definitely, this book is poking fun at sort of Dungeons and Dragons, dungeon adventures, that type of thing. I think the best way to describe it is, and actually it was the designer who came up with it was Dungeons and Dysfunction instead of Dungeons and Dragons. That's actually what we're reading here. So you have the dysfunction between the characters and the relationship, but also like everything that can go wrong typically kind of goes wrong in this book as they're making their way through the dungeon, which is this underground ancient city. So it's definitely playing on that. And it has throughout it a bit of an Ocean's 11 heist feeling too, because you got a couple of thieves, they're professionals in their world, they're working to get this treasure, but then there's a series of flashbacks to other jobs that they've done in the past where they're trying to steal things and all the things that kind of go sideways when they do that in this magical world.
Well, you kind of give away what you watch, right? Did you watch Ocean 11?
Oh yeah. I've seen all of them many times. I've seen the original, Yeah, I like heist movies, right? I mean, you give me a good thief and that type of thing. There's something about the gentleman thief who kind of falls ass backwards into success that I've found just perennially endearing. And so you have that in these two characters who are incredibly flawed. I mean, obviously they're morally bankrupt, they're thieves. But they're also in a fantasy world where, there's morals are sort of few and far between, seldom. There might be different reinterpretations, but they have their own code. They have their own way they view the world and what's, how they separate right from wrong and survive things, right? And so I like that humor. You find that humor in the Ocean's movies, the original as well as the follow-ups. And I think in this day and age, I write humor naturally. But I think in this day and age, if you can have a fun adventure with a lot of humor laced in, that it kind of stands out. It's not the everyday crime thriller that you will come across on the bookshelf.
Well, you got the horror and the comedy and all of that stuff in there, right? You can twist
Yeah.
it. The twisted
Yes.
mind. I remember that about the other book, right? You put that twist in there.
Yeah, pretty well. Yeah, just when you think that things are going one way or it's this genre, then I'll twist it and turn it back on itself. So, it is fair to describe this book as classic high fantasy sword and sorcery. But then suddenly it'll turn back on itself and it'll be a comedy heist. And then suddenly it'll turn back on itself and it's emotionally heavy, or it'll turn back on itself and it's like, oh, that's actually quite scary. That's something that we'd like to avoid. So it definitely pokes around those edges. At its heart, though, it is very much what I like to write, and I think you and I talked about this before, which is pulp fiction. That type of paperback book that you would have found in the 70s and 80s. I'm still pumping those out. I have no desire to stop. So I think that'll be a constant theme in my writing career.
You said pulp fiction, and all I could see is John Travolta doing this.
Yeah. I meant the traditional Pulp Fiction from way, way, way back then. Not quite the movie. Yeah.
Yeah, my head just went whoop.
Yeah, no, fair. I mean, you raise a good point, because most people would think when I say Pulp Fiction, most people would think the movie, right? Because that, of course, would be the more sort of well-known use of that term. But of course, I'm a literary nerd, so and a former journalist, so I go back to like pulpy newsprint comic books, really cheap dime stories that were printed in magazines and newspapers on that type of paperback in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, all the way through to the 80s, right? So that's what I'm talking about, is that type of thing. And if you're a reader or an audience member who's like, what the heck is he talking about? Like, just go back and read.
Just do the dance. Go on.
Yeah, do the dance. Maybe read some old time writers. You probably read them. You didn't even know you were reading Pulp Fiction. So there you go.
Right? We're giving our ages away here.
Yeah. Well, I find, with each passing year, it's starting to catch up to me now.
Well, the body starts to tell its age too, right?
Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah, definitely.
Well, we had some questions that came in, Joe, for you, so I want to get those out to you tonight.
Yeah.
The first one that came in is 2 thieves, 1 treasure, 0 trust. What first sparked the idea for the Dungeoneer and the treasure of Rome? And what emotional chord sits beneath all of the chaos and comedy?
Yeah, so a good question. It's a two-parter. So the first part is, what was the first spark? So a number of years ago, I was on a little writing getaway in the Robson Valley, which I try to do a couple times a year. It's a remote but beautiful place right next to the Rocky Mountains, a couple hours from here. And I was down there writing, and I got an idea of just an image in my head of a character running up the side of a snowy mountain and disappearing into it and looking over his shoulder before he went into it. And it just stuck in my head clear as day. And he was, who is this person? What are they running from? What are they disappearing to? Why are they looking over their shoulder? And so it kind of came to me. I'm like, oh, it's a thief. They're after something. And so the book itself is actually, and this is partially what made the world building easier, is that the geography is modeled on the Robson Valley. So it's British Columbia. When in British Columbia, or how in British Columbia, I suppose is an adequate question to a different answer to a different question entirely. So I won't go there quite yet. But so the spark came from that, and then I knew I wanted to chase this thief through the dungeon and figure out what they were after. But then they ran into this other individual, and I didn't know right off the bat that this other individual who became Sish was their kid. I didn't know that. And so I struggled for a little while writing this book. And it was like the first 3 or 4 chapters I had written, I thought they were really good. They were smart. They were funny. And then I put it down for a while because I was hitting a wall. And then I kind of went back to it and I was like, yeah, that's their relationship. And they actually need to go in the other direction in the dungeon, quite literally. They were going to go in one direction, and then I turned them around and they go across a lake, and then that leads them into an entirely different. And that unlocked the rest of the book. So that was the idea. It took a while to get there. I had to work through it. I suppose the emotional connection with it is that I find the relationship between fathers and sons as a son. And I have a father and I have a stepdad, and I was fortunate to have really good relationships with both of them, but not always. And I struggled with my relationship with my father through my teenage years and my 20s to reconcile that. And, you know, so I know that. I know what that feels like. I know how difficult that can be. And I know that it is pretty well universal. No matter what version of it you have, you're always trying to reconcile your relationship with your parents. And it's not until you become an adult that you actually really think about it. You go through your teens and maybe you like them, maybe you don't, but they're just kind of other people and you're frustrated by them. But when you become an adult, that's one of the first things that I think you start reflecting on as you gain experience and wisdom is, you know, these people really pissed me off, or these people didn't look after me, or whatever that is. And it takes a long time, and some people never get there to reconcile that relationship with your parents and make peace with it, right? No matter what it is, good, bad, ugly, whatever it is, it takes a number of years. Well, I've taken that process and I've condensed it into one dungeon adventure where that reconciliation process for both of them it happens over a span of days through the shared experience and life altering circumstances and all that other kind of thing. So I took that inspiration to answer the question, an idea from a writing adventure, and that adventure is based on geography, which made my life easier, and I wanted to write that action adventure. And then I said, you know, this is something, because I had reached the age when I started working on this, which was in my mid to late 30s, where I had come through the other side of that and reconciled my relationship with my parents. Whereas that's something at least I know enough about that I can add some depth to the characters and explore that and unpack that. And that is why that's the reason for the flashbacks throughout it as well, because you can't really understand the characters until you go back in time and see what's gone on. But I wanted the audience to see each character's own interpretation of those events, ratcheting back and forth, because the father's going to have a different view and different motivators that the son's not going to understand, and same on the other side, right? And that's what creates your tension, is they're both trying to do the right thing for themselves based on what they knew at the time, and it ended up in the relationship that fell apart, and now they have a chance, if they seize it, to see if they can repair that.
I think it's pretty cool that you put the father and son in a dungeon.
Yeah. Well, it's fun, right? I mean, you know, there's only one way, in my experience. Well, there's multiple ways, but the most effective way to solve a problem, interpersonal problems between two individuals. It doesn't have to be a familial relationship. It could be coworkers, it could be teammates, whatever it is. People are opposite ends of the negotiating table. You isolate them, you stick them in circumstances where they have to rely on one another for a period of time in order to get through it. And one of two things is going to happen. Either there's going to be a homicide, or they're going to come out best friends. And I think that is universal in life. And so I am playing into that a little bit, which is, well, how do you speed up the reconciliation of a father-son relationship? Put them in a dungeon, right? So
there's nobody else there, right? Who are you going to talk to?
Yeah. And the novel pokes fun at that. And I'm not giving anything away, but from the first chapter, the first discussion between the two of them is why one didn't kill the other when he had the chance. And so I'm setting the stage for that right away. And there's lots of opportunities for them to kill one another as they go along. But they become, I hope, as you read it, it becomes less and less likely that they're obviously going to act on that, because they're starting to work through that relationship and view it in a different way.
Well, I think this is an awesome book for Christmas. Like, get your book for father and son, right? Poke at your dad, poke at your son.
Yeah, right? Absolutely. And it has treasure, lots of treasure. So Christmas is, you know, presents.
There's your treasure.
Presents. You
get it all in one.
Yeah, there it is.
Joel, one thing I noticed about all your books, you base them on British Columbia and the environment in that. Why is that?
It's my own attachment to place, which is something that I'm currently unpacking and exploring as part of my master's, which I'm doing here in literature, which is really looking at place and placelessness and how they impact literature and how you can use those concepts to write effective literature. I think at the end of the day, I'm just a passionate British Columbian. I'm a passionate Canadian, but Canada is a big, big country. And for your listeners who are Canadian, they will understand this. For your listeners who are American, I think the corollary is like a Texan is not a New Yorker, a New Yorker is not a Californian, a Nebraskan is not somebody from Wyoming, and nor is somebody from Oklahoma exactly like a Kansan, right? Like everybody's a little bit different. Canada's the same way. It's gargantuan. It's sparsely populated, and I was fortunate to be born and raised in its westernmost province, which is probably the most unusual of the provinces in the sense that it had its own identity as a colony well established before it ever joined the country. And it has the most complex geography and ecosystems. Like it's all mountains. If you look at the rest of Canada, there's mountains are few and far between. She's pretty flat all the way to Toronto at the very least. But here in British Columbia, it's mountains and river valleys and glaciers and wild animals. It's a I call it the Balkans of Canada because it's of its geography. But you see that play out in its politics, its culture too. I mean, in Canada, I think there's about 500 Indigenous nations, and in British Columbia is home to 200 of them. So the complexity of British Columbia's I would say cultural, anthropological, human history is off the charts. It's still present. And then layer on top of that settlement and the complexity of that, and then where we built our cities and how, like, you get into BC and it's like, well, I'm from northern BC. And it's like, well, what does that mean? What part of northern BC are you from? Because Prince George is different than Fort St. John or Fort Nelson or Terrace or Rupert or all these other places, right? And well, if you're from Vancouver Island, people have a different view of you than if you're from the Lower Mainland. And if you're in the Lower Mainland, are you from Vancouver properly? Are you from Burnaby or, wherever, Surrey or, God forbid, the Abbotsford? So I've been fortunate. I'm a third generation British Columbian. My great grandparents settled here right around the First World War in the Robson Valley. And then I was raised in the Lower Mainland in Vancouver. My dad was a police officer in Vancouver, so I grew up running around the city and learning all about it. And I was a journalist down there, and I got to cover British Columbia. I got to understand British Columbia, and then eventually I moved back up north to Prince George, not far from the Robson Valley, and fell in love with British Columbia and its history in a different way, and have been serving it in sort of public sector roles since. So I think for me, long story short, I just love the place. I think it's fascinating. It's an interesting place to write from. And I'm not sure that there is enough literature out there that always embraces the place. There's a lot of artists who write from British Columbia, but they're not necessarily writing about British Columbia or of British Columbia. And so I think for us, for our own identity, that's a demon we need to exercise a little bit more and get out there. And I'm not claiming I'm good at it, but I'm happy to contribute to an emerging literary tradition of British Columbia authors who write about British Columbia and do it through genre fiction, which is a whole other beast.
I think it's really cool because anybody that wants to know anything about British Columbia, just buy one of your books. You give little tips and keys and check this out, check this space out. I know in the other book, it came from the trees. You had some scary places or haunted places in British Columbia that you had put in.
Yeah, it was the title or story there is not so haunted, but it takes place just outside of Prince George with a bunch of tree planters, and it's a terrifying story of a parasite that takes over the body. So it's a body horror.
Oh, yeah,
but it's tied to the forest industry, which is quite significant here. And so throughout my work, whether it's short fiction or longer stuff, you do see, to your point, not an overt sort of here's 3 pages of British Columbia history in order to understand, this place, but just little tidbits that are interspersed in there, almost as this is just how it is here. And part of that is, well, that's what a New Yorker does when they write about New York. It's almost with this attitude of, well, didn't you know that that's what the Lower East Side is like? Like, they don't bother explaining it to you. They're just like, this is what the Lower East Side is like, right? And so I try to take that approach with British Columbia. I'm not really going to explain it to you. This is just how it is. And if you keep reading, you'll learn more about it over time.
I think it's pretty cool the way you do it. And the other book that you wrote as well is called, what's the other one that I have here?
Wolf at the Door?
Yes. That one has stuff about British Columbia as well, right?
It does, yeah. So it's set here too. It doesn't overtly say it's set in Prince George, but it basically is. And it's definitely Canadian because Thanksgiving is in October, and it's a werewolf story. So it's a Thanksgiving Halloween story, which is a unique little Canadian mashup. I think we're the only country that does it quite like that. Yeah, it's got those elements of northern BC and Prince George built into it, but it's otherwise just a werewolf comedy horror story, right? That you can pick up anywhere, but it's unapologetic about its place, and where it comes from, and therefore doesn't see the need to justify or explain it. It just is, as the background, and you either get it and recognize it and appreciate that, or you don't, you brush right over it. But I think that's kind of my point around us being creators coming out of British Columbia, coming out of Canada. Any creator that comes out of anywhere in the world, be unapologetic about it. I don't need to write a love story set in Paris. I mean, kudos to everybody who does that. But if I was ever going to write a romance, it'd probably be set here in British Columbia. Right? And I'd be unapologetic about it.
You're getting from British Columbia.
Yeah, I'd be unapologetic about it.
He loves the place. Why not? Yep. Right? British Columbia has some really beautiful scenery. Like you can fall in love in British Columbia. But come on, like go travel.
Yeah, pretty easily, right? Yeah.
The next question I have for you is: your fiction often mixes humor, horror, and heart. What draws to that blend, and what's the truth about humanity? Humanity hides inside your monsters.
Yeah. I think the humor is simply because I'm a big believer that I, as you can probably tell, and this is the second time we've had one of these chats, I usually don't go more than a minute or two without cracking a joke somehow, and most of them don't land, but like that's who I am. That's humor is a big thing. My parents taught me that. And it's often dark humor. Remember, as I said earlier, I grew up, my father was a police officer, and he's a great man. But if you've ever spent any time around cops, they have gallows humor, like really dark humor. And so I inherited that from an appreciation for that from a very young age. And I think it may be that I'm also just naturally attracted to monster stories and the darker side of life. And so you start to blend those things together, right? So I think humor and horror naturally go together, and they naturally fit me. The question is, how do you inject heart? How do you inject that piece in there? And I think that is actually probably the key ingredient, now that you asked, that makes it work, because it's not really funny if you don't relate to the characters. And it's not really scary if you don't have empathy for the characters. So you have to build heart as the writer in there. You have to, in your characters, the reader can see shades of themselves or shades of people that they know, circumstances that they've been into, even if these circumstances are fantastical and ludicrous. And then the relationship between the characters themselves. They have to bounce off of one another in a way that feels natural, the way that we do. And so I think there's the heart is where I've tried to get better as a writer, to craft that in there to really make the humor and the horror punch. The humor and the horror, I think, comes pretty naturally to me. I don't have to work that hard at coming up with the ideas for that. But I would say where I have struggled, and I'm hopefully getting better, is on the conflict, the empathy, and creating the relationship between the characters in a way that truly comes across for the reader. When I wrote Wolf at the Door, I was really trying to figure out conflict between characters. And so I set up a dinner party, and I had all people who don't get along with one another sit beside one another, and I laid all that out.
Just like a family Thanksgiving.
Exactly right. Because I was like, well, how do I make this blow up? Well, I know what I'll do. I know who all these characters are roughly as the writer. I'll just sit them down next to the person who the natural course of conversation during a holiday dinner with a little bit of wine, it's going to blow up. But then it's going to happen, 6 times around the table, and then that's a disaster. And so that's what I was working on with Wolf at the Door, was how to create conflict between characters out of really mundane stuff. And then of course entered the werewolf, and now you've got characters who've gone through a disastrous dinner party and have these past relationships, and it's all blown up. Now you put them in a survival situation. And it actually just kind of, the rest of the book wrote itself. And I hate to say that, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It actually, like, at that point in time, like, you just follow them and then it's easy. And that was the trouble with the Dungeoneers, was that until I understood the relationship between Wincott and Sish and a bit of the history there, I couldn't go any further with the book. It didn't really have anywhere to go. I knew the setting, I knew the world, I knew the treasure, I knew a bunch of the background, I knew who some of the supporting cast were going to be, but I didn't understand or know and hadn't figured out quite yet what the fundamental heart of the novel was, and the heart of the novel. And it's why I don't spend as much time on fleshing out some of the surrounding cast. I'll come back to that. Is I really wanted the reader to have, you've only got 300 pages. It's not a lot of space to get a really deep understanding of these two characters and this father-son relationship as a backbone entranceway to this world, which is intended to be a serialized number of novels, and future novels will explore the other characters. So that's kind of, so they can fall under the Dungeoneers brand, but it may not be from Wincott and Sish's point of view. It may be from some of the other characters, and that's very intentional on my point. My part.
Well, Joel, 300 pages when you get into a good book is not a long book.
No, that's true. It's long for the writer, though. It's long for the writer. Right? Like the first 50,000 words, you know, when you've got a good idea,
like, what the heck?
That comes pretty easily. But that second 50,000, when you're trying to round this thing out, oh man, like it's like, yeah, that's a bit of a slog.
Well, it's like the Thanksgiving dinner, right?
Yeah.
Who do you take out? Like, who gets eliminated? Like, who, you know, because you probably build a cast and then you're like, oh, maybe not this story. So you take that person out, put that person in.
Yes. So on that note, I had that very thought when I was writing Wolf of the Doors. Who am I going to kill? Who's going to survive? One thing that I knew I didn't want to do was I didn't want to have a final girl. Because I didn't want to kill that many. I wanted to kill a lot of them. but I didn't. He
was in a state when he wrote that book.
Yeah, like I didn't want to get down to, well, it's a final girl story and and all the, you know, the moral implications of that and everything. And I mean, that's been debated back and forth in film and literary circles for decades, right? But I did make some decisions and made some decisions to get rid of a number of people who were completely innocent. So that was the other way, which is, where do you kill people based on their moral status? And I thought to myself, oh, well, that's not how the world is. So, you know, like, I'm not just going to punish the, you know, the teenager who's having, you know, unprotected sex or drinking or whatever it is that you'd see in the old slasher novels. No, I'm going to take out somebody who's completely innocent. They're a bystander, happen to be in the wrong part of the house at the wrong time. And I'm going to do it over and over and over again, because life is like that. It's kind of chaotic. It's just random as to how this plays out. I think that, whether I pulled that off or not, but that was the intent behind the horror, is that it actually, you can't see it coming. You can't predict who's going to go next based on how important they are to the plot. And then the other piece was, there were some characters who I wanted to leave behind in the event that I wanted to return to these characters in the future, which I intend to do. And I've sketched out the sequel for Wolf at the Door. And as soon as I'm done my master's and have my thesis off my plate, I'll probably get to it. But that was the other thing too, is I think when I find a space that I like writing in, I kind of create these insurance policies for myself, which is, well, maybe I want to go back to a couple of these people later and actually, you know, write another story.
Have you ever killed somebody and then you're like, oh no, I killed that person?
Yeah. I actually had to go back through Wolf at the Door the other day to double check something, because I was like, I can't remember what I did there. Like, was that individual wounded? How badly were they wounded? Like, can they show up again and be a full person? Like, do they have, anyway? So yeah, you have to do that. I did that lots with the Dungeoneers because it's a lot longer. I had to go back and be like, okay, well, where did that end up and at what time, and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Because I don't have, obviously, you know, a lore keeper for myself to manage all this stuff. I have to keep it up here or in notes somewhere. Otherwise I forget the narrative myself.
Well, writing so many books too, sometimes you're like, oh, did I kill that person in that book or that book, or
Yeah,
was it this book? Like,
yeah, yeah. And I don't think this is going to get any easier over time, right? Because if the intention is to continue to write and publish, but also get older and lose my memory, I think at some point those two come together, and I'll end up writing a book that makes no sense
I'm
whatsoever.
in the dungeon. No, I'm not in the dungeon. No, I'm in the living
Yeah,
room. No, I'm not in the living room.
yeah. I don't know where I am. I don't know where I am. I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah. But hopefully it'll be like 30 or 40 books from now, right? Where people would give me a pass and say, yeah, but he was super old. So what?
We'll just let it fly. Well, we had a question that came in, and you kind of already answered that question, but I just want to get it out there for you, Joel. And they said you described your book as Dungeons and Dysfunction meets Ocean 11. What personal experiences or relationships inspired the father and son dynamic at its center?
You know what? None actually from my life. I would say that the theme of Father and Sons, as I said before, was inspired by my own experiences, but very from a global perspective, not specifically. I mean, um, my father and I are law-abiding citizens, and my stepdad is too. He's a veteran of the U.S. Army, so like we're not thieves stealing trinkets from underground dungeons or having heists at banks or anything like that. So I think the relationship between the two of them was just something I invented and I wanted to explore, and I probably read and watched enough heist books, crime books, that type of thing, that I kind of knew the strings to pull on and what to create there. I also find that more interesting to write, which is people, perhaps it's because I do obey the law, writing about people who consciously don't, are self-aware enough to know that they're on the wrong side of sort of the moral argument in whatever world they exist and continue on, is interesting to me. And so this actually points back to your signal to Pulp Fiction, the movie. I think that's a lot of what Tarantino does. I think he likes to explore and give us these characters who live on a spectrum of moral acceptance, depending on the circumstances and the issues, but are generally coming out of a pretty gray area or a darker side of the world, and yet they're kind of funny and oddball, and we relate to them, even though they live lives that most of us will never be exposed to, do not want to be exposed to in any way. That's what this book is too, right? I mean, obviously we're not all going to be fantasy adventures in a world full of magic. That'd be cool. If somebody finds a portal to that, let me know. But
well, you already talked about the cave, the winter cave. Somebody went into the cave, like
somebody went into the cave. Yeah. So anyway, to answer the question,
there is a portal there somewhere.
Maybe they haven't. Yeah. There is a cave that is based off of, not far from here, and nobody's ever found the bottom of it. So maybe there is. Maybe there is an ancient city under there. I don't know. But to answer that question, no. The relationship between Wincott and Sish is not based on anybody specifically. It is globally based on the theme of father and sons, and trying to reconcile and knowing that that's a process that most people go through in their life. And then I invented the relationship. I created two thieves, and thieves are fun to write about.
Well, we have a question here about your characters, and it says, your stories feature broken, messy, funny people doing the right thing eventually.
Yeah.
Why do flawed characters connect so deeply with your readers?
I think because we're all flawed, if we're being real honest about it. Even those of us who can admit some of our flaws can only really scratch the surface of our flaws. There's a whole iceberg underneath of our flaws that the people who love us or maybe don't love us around us are keenly aware of and don't point out to us all the time. I think if you write perfect characters, you run the risk of them being boring, and your reader not engaging with them. I know for me, I write what I want to read, and so I want to read about the struggles and the people that made mistakes and screwed things up. Even if they're really good people and they make good decisions, they still find themselves at points of failure along the journey, because you can do everything right all the way along the way and still fail. And that's a reality of life. And so I think that is why I write those characters. That is why the morally ambiguous is interesting to me. I mean, I suppose the people who love me would say, well, Joel, you're a bit morally ambiguous in your own way, which is probably true. But I find it far more interesting, far richer. You can go in different places. And then there's a redemption arc. There's a natural redemption arc that happens in there, right? Where somebody can mistake, failure, failure, and then push through, persevere, and say, no, I got to do the right thing here. Yeah, okay, I'm going to do the right thing. Even if they don't understand the reasons why they're doing the right thing, or maybe they do. And I think that comes back. Doesn't mean they're always going to be doing the right thing from then on. And I think part of that comes from some of the superhero characters that I most attach myself to as a reader would be morally ambiguous characters like Wolverine or Batman or Conan the Barbarian, who had their adventures, had their own identities, did their own things, stood up for something, but also there was some darkness in all of them. There was some ambiguity around what their true motivations were at any given point. I'm the guy who never found Superman comics particularly interesting, because Superman is just a perfect alien who came here, is always trying to do the right thing and can't figure out why our planet is so flawed. So to me, not as interesting.
I never really found Superman interesting either. I always found him as the guy who picked up Lois and just flew around.
Yeah, like, pretty much.
Like, okay, he saved he saved like trains falling or stuff like that, but I never really got the character of Superman.
No, I mean, he's not human. He's an alien. So in that sense, you can say, I think as a creator, well, you can defend him. Because he's not human, therefore he shouldn't have the trappings of humans and some of those moral challenges, the fallibility. Superman is in many ways perfect, right? Awkward socially maybe, but perfect, right? He's always trying to do the right thing. At least that's how he's often portrayed. And so, again, I'm not sure how that sort of exists or lives within Earth and storytelling around Earth, right? Because I mean, Earth is it's the savage garden, it's the jungle, like everything's a little bit morally ambiguous down here, right? And we are too as a species. And I think coming at that, whether you write contemporary fiction, literature, genre fiction, whatever it is, you create movies, you create television shows, write poetry, whatever it is, coming at the complexity of that, I think, is what we're all trying to do as artists and show and explore a little bit, because that is our experience. And I hate to hate on Superman, because he's amazing and there's so many things. You go on for hours about the contributions that Superman has made to superheroes and fiction and hero myth and all that other kind of stuff. But if you go back and you study hero myth and the hero's journey and mythology, from an Earthling's perspective, there's a lot of flaws on the path to heroism, and a lot of challenges and things that need to be overcome and decision points. And you see that in every culture and every history around every story, whether it's a mythological story or a fictionalized version of history. You see your hero or heroine struggling through much of the same thing. So to me, again, as a writer, that's where I want to be. I think that's who I am ultimately, as somebody like all the rest of us, just struggling, trying to figure life out day by day, and some days getting it right, some days not. That's interesting to write about. That's interesting to read about.
Well, I think a superhero that only the romance story. I think it was more of a romance story than superhero for me.
Yeah, for sure. You could, I suppose, get rid of the entirety of the superhero aspect, the crime fighter, the safety of the Superman, and you could just have his entire story be about trying to figure out how to fall in love with Lois and be a real man, not be an alien. Like, open up, not be the strong person. Like, how do you actually be an effective partner to someone like Lois when you're Superman? And does Superman have the capability, the emotional depth to do that? So you bring that up, Liz, that's a fascinating angle by which to come at Superman. Now, if somebody went and did that, they would be blasted. left, right, and center of,
You think
you
so?
know, you're emotionalizing, you're feminizing Superman, blah, 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 blah. But I actually think, now that you've raised it and we've said it, that might be the only way to make that story interesting. You know, is that relationship, because it sure as shit isn't his relationship with Lex Luthor, right? That's not
Right.
that interesting. So there you go.
Yeah. See, I didn't even know I was going to talk about Superman tonight.
Me neither.
For all the Superman lovers out there, we're not bashing him. We're just saying you could twist it a little bit. We need a little bit of twist.
Yeah, I think what we're saying is that as two readers and people who are passionate about story, since we're on here talking about story, we've got, you know, that Superman's not really ringing the gong for us on a day-to-day basis. But if it were, maybe it needs to go in this direction. And take it or leave it, audience members, right? I mean, you either agree or you don't. It is what it is.
I'm going to get a lot of haters for Superman.
Yeah, maybe.
Why is fantasy and horror so related to us? It's almost like a mirror, like humanity, Joe.
You know, I think it's because through those, and I won't be the first person to say this, but I'll probably butcher it in how I articulate it. I think through those genres, you're able to actually hone in on truth about the human experience in a way that is more difficult if the story is set in the contemporary real world. Because if you're in the contemporary real world with your reader, and you've got a horror story or a fantasy story, it's easy to get lost in what that world actually is and debate about bits and pieces and what's true, what's relevant. Is this actually, you know, is this what, you know, this city is like, or what life is like at this point, or for this income level of person, or the person with this background, right? You get lost in that stuff. If I take you and I write a story and I say, okay, I'm going to put you in, you know, modern day Seattle, and you're at all familiar with Seattle, and every day is sunny, you're going to say, well, you know, now we're having a debate around whether or not I, as an author, captured the weather correctly, instead of what I'm really trying to get at, which is some of these truths about the human existence. And so if you step out of our world and you go into another world, which horror and fantasy demand, science fiction as well, by and large, you've taken away that argument entirely, and now it is entirely about the characters, their experiences, and the emotional components of the story, and whether or not that rings true to the human experience. So we can have a story set in the clouds with cloud beings who are fighting against, you know, a warming sun or a cooling air and turning to ice. We can believe all of that. Where it would be unbelievable is if they don't act like humans. And so they have to act like people. They have to have struggles. There has to be conflict. There has to be all those things. And then we could, if the writer does the appropriate job of that, now you can buy into the story and forget the fact that they're cloud people. You'll overlook that because it's a fantasy. In the case of horror, I think that it is getting at, Jaws is a good example of this. There are still creatures on this planet that can eat us. And so we're going to put you in line sight of a creature that can and will eat you if it gets the opportunity. They are in the ocean. They do exist. They may not be as big as the one in this movie, but they're there. And this happens. And we're going to put you in a life or death scenario, and we're going to see how you react and how you deal with that. And that's the interesting thing in that story, is I think you can get back to some of those almost baseline, primal, or instinctive pieces that earlier humans would have had to deal with on a day-to-day basis, that we who live in the luxury of our nerd dens don't have to face as much, and then ask ourselves the question, would I have done the same thing? Would I have reacted in that way? Is that believable? Did that stick with me? Does that inspire me? Does that give me hope or creativity or fear? So I think stepping into genre fiction takes away the day-to-day reality and puts you into this fantastical environment to struggle through and work through truth. And then it's the author's job to try and capture that truth in a way that resonates.
Well, Joel, you just threw out 3 good movies for people to check out tonight: Jaws, Ocean 11, and Pulp Fiction.
Those are good movies. Really good movies. Yeah. But not Superman.
No, Superman, he's got to work on his thing.
Yeah, he's got to work. Yeah, there's got to be some work on Superman.
Well, Joe, we have some questions, some lightning bolt questions here. I want to get them out before we wrap up. Favorite fantasy creature you'd share a pint with?
A pint with.
A pint.
Favorite fam is so something I can talk to. I don't know. I'll pick a centaur. Just off the top of my head. Yeah, centaur. Have a conversation with a centaur and see if I can drink them under the table.
Hardest scene you ever wrote? One word.
Sorry, say that again.
Hardest scene you ever wrote in one word.
Emotional.
Oh. Song that fueled your writing flow.
Skyrim Atmospheres.
Oh. Book that made you fall in love with storytelling.
Raymond E. Feist's Magician. Funniest
line you've ever written.
It's in the Dungeoneers. It's early on. I'll paraphrase here, but it's multitasking is the fastest path to mediocrity.
Three words that define your story. Funny, magic, father, and son. That's 4 words.
Yeah, so I would say family, funny, magic.
Tea or whiskey while editing?
Oh, it's got to be tea. If I start drinking whiskey, I'm just going to want to have a nap.
Fishing, hiking, or biking? What order comes first?
Fishing, hiking, biking.
Oh, in that order, huh?
Yeah.
One word that captures the Dungeoneers.
Fun.
No. Favorite fantasy creature? No, we already did that one. I think I got them all. Oh, finish this. Writing is blank.
Joy.
Oh, well, look at that. We had a question that came in about some awards that you got, because you got some awards for the other books. Bold Wolfen at the Door and It Came from the Trees earned major awards. What lessons from those projects carried into the Dungeoneers?
Interesting people is the answer. It's try to create interesting people that are going to be relatable to whoever is reading. And so you have to let them make decisions that you wouldn't make yourself. This is one of the great challenges in writing, is that especially in writing horror, when you throw a series of characters together and they're, being stalked by something, or something is starting to figure out, it is really easy as the author to figure out and say, well, why don't they just realize that it's a ghost or a witch? All the signs are there, it's obvious. And then go see, the magical person that's going to give them the solution to this, and bing, bang, boom, we've solved their problem. How come they never see that it is, what it is until late in the show? It's too late. And I found for a long time I struggled as a writer. I made my characters have very rational decisions that actually ended up like negating the horror. Like the stories ended 5 pages in. No, they made a good decision. There's no story here. So
I still got 295 pages to go.
Yeah. I had to make them bad decisions, right? Or things they didn't notice. Or I had to find clever ways for them to not notice it or not do anything about it, but for that to be acceptable by the reader. Be like, yeah, okay, yeah, I get it. Yeah, they didn't quite see that yet, right? Because if you start doing things where it's so obvious that, then a reasonable character suddenly doesn't feel real if they're not reacting to that thing. And so that was the struggle that I had to work through, and I still do. And so learning from those first 2 books was an exercise in that, and it helped me in the Dungeoneers, where you're seeing the natural progression of the characters making decisions based on the circumstances that they're in as they comb through the dungeon.
And where can people find your books, Joel?
Amazon or my website. So Amazon, you can search up my name, or my website, joelmackay.ca, and you can sign up for my newsletter, and then you'll get the latest coming from me, and where to buy my books, and so on and so forth.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for tonight's tea time. Joel, I really enjoyed our time together, like always.
So did I.
We're going to do a closing summary up here, and then we're going to wrap it up, and we're going to close this tea time, and we'll be back on Thursday for 2 more, and then on Friday. It is a full week for Miss Liz. What an extraordinary tea time this has been with Joel McKay. Through his lens, we've been reminded that stories are more than entertainment. They're survival, connection, and legacy, all woven into words. He's shown us that even the monsters we fear can become teachers if we're willing to listen closely enough. So as this tea time closes, I invite you to honor your own story, every chapter, every scar, every laugh in between, because within it lies the courage to begin again. Thank you, Joel, for reminding us that imagination heals and that even in the friction, we often find our deepest truths. And I'll see everybody on Thursday with 2 new tea times.